That was the moment my life split into two parts. Before I understood what I'd been carrying all these years, and after. I was 62 years old, standing in a hospital waiting room at 2 a.m. when a stranger looked at my hands and everything changed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to 3 days earlier, when I was convinced I'd already hit the lowest point possible. The fluorescent lights in the convenience store made everything look sickly yellow. I was on my knees, mopping up a spill in aisle 3, when I heard the laugh. Not just any laugh, my ex-wife's laugh. I looked up and there she was, designer purse, new husband in an expensive suit, staring down at me like I was something stuck to her shoe. "Richard," she said, and my name sounded like an accusation. "I heard you were working retail now, but I didn't believe it." I stood up slowly, my knees cracked. 62 years old and mopping floors for $11 an hour. The same hands that had once designed guidance systems for NASA were now squeezing out dirty water into a yellow bucket. "Jennifer." I kept my voice neutral. Her husband, whatever his name was, whispered something to her. They both smirked. She leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume. The same scent she'd worn when she'd served me divorce papers 5 years ago. "You know what I told people when they asked why I left? I said you were brilliant once, but brilliant doesn't pay bills when you're too stubborn to admit you're wrong. Look at you now. A washed-up engineer, playing janitor." They bought their items and left. I stood there, mop in hand, feeling every second of my 62 years. The night shift manager, a kid young enough to be my grandson, asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine. I'd been telling people I was fine for 5 years. Nobody believed it. I didn't believe it myself. The truth was, I'd lost everything when I blew the whistle on a faulty component in a military satellite system. I'd spent 30 years at Lockheed working on classified projects, had 3 patents to my name, mentored dozens of engineers. But when I found the flaw in the attitude control system and reported it, they buried my findings, said I was wrong. When I pushed harder, they pushed back harder. Within 6 months, I was blacklisted from the entire aerospace industry. My marriage didn't survive the bankruptcy. My daughter Sarah stopped returning my calls after Jennifer convinced her I'd thrown away our comfortable life over paranoid delusions. My son Marcus sent a text on my 60th birthday. "Mom says you chose your pride over your family. I think she's right." That was the last time I heard from either of them. So there I was, 2 years later, mopping floors and stocking shelves. I'd applied for engineering positions at community colleges, high schools, anywhere that might value 3 decades of experience. But the blacklist followed me everywhere. I was radioactive. I finished my shift at 6 a.m. and walked to my studio apartment. The heating barely worked. I made instant coffee and looked at the framed photo I'd kept. Sarah's graduation from MIT. Marcus's commissioning ceremony at the Air Force Academy. Both of them had inherited my aptitude for mathematics and physics. Both of them hated me now. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Richard Chen?" A woman's voice, professional, urgent. Speaking. "Mr. Chen, my name is Dr. Patricia Okonkwo. I'm calling from Johnson Space Center. I need to speak with you about a critical situation. Can you meet me at Memorial Hermann Hospital in Houston within 2 hours?" I looked at my coffee, my cramped apartment, my reflection in the dark window, a tired old man who mopped floors. "I think you have the wrong person. You worked on the Luna Gateway navigation system in 2019. You have expertise in orbital mechanics that we desperately need. Please, Mr. Chen, this is life and death. Life and death." The same words I'd used 5 years ago when I reported the faulty component. Nobody had listened then. Why me? And why a hospital? Because there are only 4 people in the country who understand the specific problem we're facing, and you're the only one we can reach in time. I'll explain everything when you arrive. Please. Something in her voice. Real fear. I checked my bank account on my phone. Enough for an Uber to Houston. Barely. I'll be there. 2 hours later, I walked into a private wing of the hospital. Dr. Okonkwo met me in the hallway. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with the exhausted eyes of someone who hadn't slept in days. "Thank you for coming. I know this is unusual. You said, Life and death. She led me to a conference room where 3 other people waited. A man in an Air Force uniform, a woman with a NASA badge, and someone in a black suit who didn't introduce himself. Dr. Okonkwo pulled up a screen. 18 hours ago, the International Space Station experienced a catastrophic failure in its propulsion system. They have 72 hours of emergency reserves. After that, orbital decay becomes irreversible. I stared at the numbers on the screen. My mind was already calculating trajectories before I consciously decided to engage. Can't they evacuate? The Crew Dragon that was supposed to retrieve them launched 3 days ago with a different manifest. It's already beyond recall range. The next available vehicle is 9 days out. By then, she didn't finish. How many crew? 7, including Commander Marcus Chen. The room went silent. I looked at her. My son is on the ISS? Yes, sir. He took command 6 months ago. We've kept this quiet for obvious reasons, but the propulsion failure is worse than we initially thought. We need someone who can design a workaround using only the components available on station. Someone who thinks like you do. The Air Force officer spoke up. We pulled your classified work on emergency orbital corrections, the Luna Gateway solution. Nobody else has approached problems from that angle. That work got me blacklisted. The man in the black suit finally spoke. Mr. Chen, I'm with the Department of Defense. What happened 5 years ago was complicated. But right now, 7 people will die unless we solve this, and our computer models say you're our best chance. I looked at the screen. Mathematical models, trajectory plots, component schematics. It was like seeing an old friend after years of silence. Show me everything. They did. For the next 8 hours, I worked like I was 30 again. The problem was elegant in its complexity. The ISS propulsion system had failed. Due to, and here's where my hands started shaking, the exact type of cascade failure I'd predicted 5 years ago in the satellite system. The component I'd flagged. The warning they'd ignored. Dr. Okonkwo saw my face. You knew this could happen. I tried to tell them. My voice came out hoarse. The attitude-controlled gyro. It's vulnerable to harmonic resonance at specific orbital inclinations. I wrote a 40-page report. The man in the black suit looked uncomfortable. That report was classified and suppressed. And now my son is going to die because nobody listened. No, Dr. Okonkwo said firmly. He's going to live because you're going to figure this out. Can you? I looked at the numbers again. I need to talk to the crew directly. I need their exact component inventory. And I need someone who can fabricate precision parts quickly. They gave me everything. A direct comm link to the ISS, a team of engineers on standby, and something I hadn't had in 5 years. People who listened when I spoke. At hour 12, I had the basic framework. At hour 20, I designed a makeshift solution using a damaged solar panel, 3 tablets, and parts from their emergency repair kit. It was ridiculous. It was brilliant. It might work. At hour 22, I needed to explain it to the crew, which meant I needed to talk to Marcus. His face appeared on the screen. Older than the last photo I'd seen, he'd grown a beard. He looked exhausted and terrified, though he was hiding it well. Dad? First word he'd spoken to me in 2 years. Marcus. I cleared my throat. Commander. I have a solution, but it's going to require precision assembly in a high radiation environment during an EVA. It's dangerous. Everything up here is dangerous right now. Walk me through it. For the next 3 hours, I taught my son everything I knew. The physics, the workarounds, the backup plans for the backup plans. He asked smart questions. He'd always been brilliant. This is the same failure mode you predicted, isn't it? He asked during a break. Yes. A long pause. I'm sorry we didn't believe you. Let's save that conversation for when you're back on the ground. He smiled. It was small, but it was real. Copy that. The EVA took 6 hours. I watched every second on the video feed. Dr. Okonkwo standing next to me, both of us barely breathing. Marcus and another crew member worked in near-perfect synchronization, assembling my improvised solution in the void of space. When they fired the test burn and the numbers came back green, The entire mission control room erupted. People were crying, hugging, cheering. I just sat there, watching my son's face on the screen. "It worked," he said, and his voice cracked. "Dad, it worked. Good job, Commander. See you planetside." The debrief took another 12 hours. The NASA administrator showed up, the Secretary of Defense, people whose names I recognized from news broadcasts. They all wanted to shake my hand, thank me, ask me questions. The man in the black suit pulled me aside. "Mr. Chen, there's going to be an investigation into what happened 5 years ago. I think you'll find the conclusions will be different this time. I don't care about vindication. You should. We need you. The aerospace community needs you, and..." He hesitated. "Your family needs you." Sarah arrived at the hospital that evening. She'd flown in from Boston when she heard the news. We hadn't spoken in 3 years. "Dad." She hugged me hard, and I realized I was crying. "I'm so sorry. Mom told us you'd become paranoid, that you'd sabotaged your own career. But you were right. You were right the whole time. I would have been wrong if it meant not putting your brother at risk. But you saved him. You saved all of them." Marcus returned to Earth 4 days later. The Crew Dragon picked them up without incident, and they landed in the Gulf of Mexico to a hero's welcome. I watched the coverage from my apartment, trying to decide if I should even go to the arrival ceremony. My phone rang. "Marcus, calling from quarantine. You have to be there," he said before I could speak. I told them I'm not doing any press conferences unless you're standing next to me. "Marcus, you're my father, and you're the reason I'm alive. Please." So I went. I borrowed a suit from a thrift store and took an Uber to Johnson Space Center. They'd set up a whole stage, press from around the world, families of the crew members, dignitaries. And there, in the front row, I saw Jennifer and her husband. She looked smaller than I remembered. When our eyes met, she looked away. Marcus's speech was short. He thanked his crew, the support teams, NASA, and then he paused. "But most of all, I want to thank the man who taught me to always question the data, to never accept good enough when lives are at stake, and who sacrificed everything to stand by his principles, even when it cost him his career and his family. Dr. Richard Chen. Dad, could you come up here?" The applause was deafening. I walked up on stage, and Marcus hugged me in front of everyone. Sarah was crying in the front row. Even the NASA administrator looked emotional. Later, at the private reception, Jennifer approached me. Her husband wasn't with her. "Richard." She started. "Don't." I kept my voice gentle. "You did what you thought was right. We've all paid enough. I told the kids you were crazy. I believed it. I'm sorry. They know the truth now. That's enough." She nodded and walked away. I watched her go and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just tired relief. The formal investigation took 6 weeks. They found everything I documented 5 years ago. The ignored reports, the suppressed findings, the component that had been approved despite my objections. 3 executives at Lockheed were quietly forced out. The blacklist was lifted. But more than that, they found something else in my old files. A notation I'd made about an alternative approach to spacecraft navigation using quantum entanglement principles. It was theoretical work I'd done late at night, something I'd never had time to fully develop. Dr. Okonkwo called me about it. "Richard, this could revolutionize deep space navigation. Have you continued this research?" "I've been mopping floors, Patricia." "Well, how do you feel about coming back to NASA?" "We'd like to set up a research division specifically for this, and we'd like you to lead it." I was 62 years old. Most people were thinking about retirement. But when I walked into my new office at Johnson Space Center 8 weeks after that phone call, I felt 30 again. Marcus and Sarah helped me move into a real apartment. Not fancy, but it had heating that worked and windows that didn't leak. Sarah had taken a sabbatical from her teaching position at MIT to spend time in Houston. Marcus was grounded for a few months while NASA reviewed all its safety protocols. We had dinner together every week. Sometimes we talked about the past, but mostly we talked about the future. Marcus wanted to know about my new research. Sarah was considering a career shift into aerospace engineering education. "You both got the stubbornness from me," I said one night over Chinese takeout. "I'm sorry about that." "Don't be," Marcus said. "That stubbornness saved my life." 1 year later, my research team published our first paper on quantum entanglement navigation. The response from the scientific community was immediate and enthusiastic. I was invited to present at conferences. Universities asked me to guest lecture. My team grew from 3 people to 15. On my 64th birthday, I received a package, no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping about Lockheed settling a lawsuit related to the faulty component, and a handwritten note. "You were right. I wish we'd listened. Former colleague." I didn't frame it. I threw it away. The past was the past. What I did frame was a photo from Marcus's wedding 6 months later. Him in his dress uniform, Sarah as a bridesmaid, and me standing between my children, all of us smiling like we'd never been broken. Because here's what I learned at 62 years old. Mopping floors and thinking my life was over, sometimes you don't get vindicated. Sometimes being right means losing everything. But if you're lucky, if you hold on to what matters, the truth finds its way back around. That nurse in the hospital who'd brought me coffee during those desperate hours designing the ISS fix, she pulled me aside at Marcus's wedding. "Dr. Chen, I just wanted you to know, when you were working on that solution, I watched you. I've been an ER nurse for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of people in crisis. But I've never seen someone transform like you did. You weren't a floor mopper anymore. You were exactly who you were meant to be. I was just solving a problem." "No," she said. "You were saving your son. That's different." She was right. I'd spent 5 years believing I'd lost everything because I'd been right about a technical issue. But what I found in that hospital conference room wasn't vindication. It was purpose. It was family. It was the understanding that sometimes you have to break completely before you can rebuild into something stronger. My ex-wife sent a card to Marcus's wedding. She didn't attend. The card said, "Congratulations to you both. Your father is a good man. I'm sorry it took me so long to remember that." Marcus showed it to me. "You want to reach out to her?" "No, but I'm glad she knows." At the reception, Marcus gave a toast. "My father taught me that being right isn't the same as being understood, that integrity costs something, and that the people who matter will eventually see the truth. Dad, thank you for never giving up on us, even when we gave up on you." I stood up to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Sarah squeezed my hand. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. "They know." But I wanted to. I wanted them to understand what those years in the wilderness had taught me. When I was mopping floors, I finally said, "I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. My career, my family, my purpose. But I was wrong. I'd only lost the parts of my life that were built on other people's approval. What I found instead was who I am when everything else is stripped away. And that person is someone I can respect." I raised my glass. To the people who stay. To the second chances we don't deserve, but receive anyway. And to my children, who taught me that love doesn't end just because someone stops calling. Later that night, my new research assistant cornered me. He was young, maybe 26, fresh out of grad school with more enthusiasm than experience. "Dr. Chen, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead. How did you keep going? When everyone said you were wrong, when you lost everything, how did you not give up?" I thought about it. About the fluorescent lights of the convenience store. About Jennifer's laugh. About the moment I saw Marcus's face on that screen. Terrified and trusting. "I didn't keep going because I was strong," I said. "I kept going because I didn't know how to be anything other than who I am, even when who I am cost me everything." He nodded like he understood, but he didn't. Not yet. Understanding that kind of truth takes time and pain, and the kind of failure that strips you down to your foundation. But he'd learn. We all do, eventually. That night, after the wedding, I went home to my apartment and looked at my reflection. 64 years old. Gray hair, deep lines around my eyes, hands that still sometimes shook when I thought about those 18 hours designing the ISS solution. But also, A job I loved, children who called me, research that might change space exploration, and the quiet certainty that I'd been right when it mattered most. The life I had now wasn't the one I'd planned at 30, or even at 50. It was better, because it was built on bedrock instead of other people's approval. My phone buzzed. Marcus, sending a photo from his honeymoon. Him and his new wife, both in NASA flight suits, grinning at the camera. The text said, "Thanks for teaching me to reach for the impossible. Love you, Dad." I typed back, "Love you too, Commander. Bring back Data." 3 words from my son. But they meant I'd gotten back everything that mattered. That was the moment my life split into 2 parts, before I knew what I was capable of surviving, and after. And if I had to choose which part I valued more, it wouldn't even be close. The after. Every single time. Because the before was comfortable and successful and ultimately hollow, the after was hard and painful and real. And real, I learned at 62 years old while mopping floors, is the only thing worth having.